Well, hey! Hi everyone, Drink the NUIT Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of this new M83 album, Fantasy. M83 is the musical project of multi-instrumentalist, singer, producer, and songwriter Mr. Anthony Gonzalez. This is his 9th studio album, I believe, and essentially this is the long-awaited follow-up to the 2016 album Junk, which I was not crazy about myself, as even the singles from this thing to me felt kind of overblown, lacking in direction, and maybe even a little silly. In my opinion, much of M83's recent material has reflected the sound of a project that has lost its way since reaching a commercial peak with the intergalactic sounds of Hurry Up We're Dreaming in 2011. But the 2000s run before that resulted in a pretty great series of sweet, dreamy synth-pop records that had a nice balance of texture, effects, and songwriting. But these days, that's more or less been replaced by the sound of Gonzalez constructing the biggest sound out of the most basic and forgettable ideas. That, and he's been working on a lot of soundtracks and instrumental music, even dropping a new agey follow-up to Digital Shades Volume 1 back in 2019, which went relatively unnoticed, yes, but was still an accomplishment when you consider the increase in richness and texture and instrumentation from one volume to the next. Really showed how far Anthony came as an artist over the past decade in terms of his capabilities and influences. But with that being the case, though, I have to ask, why does Fantasy only sound like a slight improvement on Junk? For one, the record kicks off with a really tedious instrumental tone setter, with an acoustic guitar that doesn't evoke much, followed by synthesizer layers that sound like an intergalactic blender droning into oblivion. And the following Ocean's Niagara feels like it's kind of building up to something too. Sure, it's got a groove and some shimmering lead melodies and more layers to it, but it doesn't sound like a song so much as it sounds like the theme to a show about a bunch of color-coded Japanese space robots that fight for their planet using the power of friendship, and it's called Squishbots. At least the record is living up to the title, I suppose, though I don't think the immersion of this fantasy runs super deep, which I think can be said for much of the album from here as well. And don't get me wrong, because as we go deeper into the record, I think Gonzalez showcases a myriad of respectable influences, from progressive electronic music to new age, new wave, a bit of neo-psych, and some synth pop too. The first properly structured song on the entire LP, Amnesia, I would even say has this hypnotic repetition of krautrock grooves, some quirky MGMT-esque Indietronica too, as well as the kind of big panoramic vocal displays you get off of a polyphonic spree record. There is potential here in this tune and in this unique confluence of sounds. It's just a shame that it comes off so washed out and toothless because of the overuse of reverb. The following Us and the Rest leaves me feeling like I'm being slowly indoctrinated into a space cult via a glistening synth odyssey dream sequence with a super overblown crescendo at the end, which is not really that gratifying as there wasn't a whole lot of tension built up to that point anyway. Then on Earth to see some new wave vibes kind of take a foothold on the track, but the sonics and progression of the song are so bloated, any pop appeal they might have gets completely smothered in tedious pacing and this blindingly bright haze. It's not nearly as wondrous as it's convinced it is, which is how I'd characterize some other key moments on the record as well, like Sunny Boy, which was it really so killer that it required a 2-minute reprise just a track later? On top of that, did the record itself need a several-minute interlude in the middle of it that just kind of adds to the generally formless and soupy sound all the songs have fallen into so far? The first half of this LP, in my opinion, is a real drag. It's not really until the second half that we get some real highlights and shakeups. Deceiver, for example, is a decent enough progressive electronic piece for most of it. It's actually kind of subtle in its pacing and initial approach with a lot of sweet analog synths. It's a little eerie, it's got a simple beat too. While it's nothing groundbreaking, I'm feeling the fantasy a bit more on this one. Then on the title track, which is nearly as washed out as anything else on here, we do actually get some standout lead melodies, plus the grooves on this one feel more geared toward the dance floor, surprisingly, which is definitely a change of pace from the overwhelming shimmer of every other song on the record. Laura kind of sounds like a Beach House and Peter Gabriel collaboration, which is absolutely a unique combo, but neither artist is really bringing their best vocal game in this scenario. KOOL NUIT stood out to me as a highlight as well, mostly because of how mysterious and eerie the instrumental sounds, mostly thanks to its dark vibes, its mysterious vocal passages, and throbbing synths. And then the closing track, which is super lengthy, does feature some interesting ideas, stunning chord progressions, some vocoder vocals too. The track shines sounds in this epic and futuristic way like something off of Daft Punk's Random Access Memories. But with the piece moving at a sloth's pace, it's not nearly as gripping as we move from section to section in the song. There's a lot of journey on this track, but not a lot of thrills. I guess outside of this deafening and over-reverbed wall of sound toward the very end of the song, which isn't exactly novel at this point because how much instrumentation like this have we heard on the album for the past hour? It doesn't feel like a special moment. It doesn't feel stand out. It adds more to the uniformity of the LP than anything. Look, overall, I enjoyed this record more than I did Junk from a while back. It's more cohesive, consistent, tasteful, less goofy, but still most of the songs on this thing drag on to the point where they get in the way of their own potential. Plus, the album itself isn't interesting or varied enough to justify all the bloat it has either. Much of the reverb and effects on these tracks are deafening and suck the flavor out of the instrumentation, which is a shame because so many of the instrumentals and mixes on Digital Shades Volume 2 were so good. Really good. There's not a single track on this thing that sounds as clear, rich, mature, or vibrant as Lune de Fiel, for example. And while Fantasy in comparison does have more of a pop appeal, have more of a songwriting element going on, sonically it just feels kind of dumbed down. I'm feeling a light 5 on this LP. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, M83, forever.